Most people who tell me that they're struggling with faith aren't actually struggling with God. They are struggling with a version of God that they were handed, often very early in life and rarely questioned out loud. A God who is easily offended, easily disappointed, and constantly watching to see if we'll mess up. A God who feels fragile, as if one hard question or one wrong belief might cause the whole thing to just collapse. And honestly, who wouldn't struggle with that type of God? One of the quiet tragedies of church is how often we shrink God down to something manageable, down to something predictable and something controllable. And we do this because uncertainty makes us anxious and because a smaller God feels easier to explain, easier to defend, and easier to keep at a distance. Over time, God stops being a living presence and becomes an idea that we're supposed to protect at all costs. But the God that we encounter in Scripture refuses to stay small. That God shows up in burning bushes and foreign lands. That God speaks through outsiders and unexpected people, and sometimes even through animals like a donkey. That God refuses to be contained by temples or traditions or certainty. And then, in the ultimate act of divine audacity, God becomes human, not as a king, not as a president, not as a general, but as a vulnerable child born into uncertainty, dependent on others, and completely uncontrollable. If God is love, then love cannot be boxed in. And when God is made small, something happens to us over time. Faith starts to feel fragile. Questions start to feel dangerous. Doubt starts to feel like disobedience instead of curiosity. And instead of asking where God might be leading us, we start asking whether we are allowed to think certain thoughts, feel certain emotions, or belong if we're not sure. A small God cannot hold complexity. A small God needs to be defended at all times, at all costs. A small God makes people hide parts of themselves in order to stay safe. And the tragedy is that none of that actually comes from God. It comes from the box we were taught to put God in. Many people leave church not because they stopped believing in God, but because they stopped believing in a God who felt too small to be worthy of trust. And sometimes walking away from a small God is the first step towards discovering a bigger one. Because when God becomes bigger again, something inside of us loosens up. Questions stop feeling dangerous. Doubt stops feeling like failure. Faith becomes less about being right and more about being honest. A bigger God does not panic when we are unsure. A bigger God does not need us to have everything figured out in order to be present. A bigger God can hold grief, hold anger, hold curiosity, and hold hope all at the same time. The audacity of God's love is not that it reassures us or smooths everything out. It's that it refuses to stay small enough for us to manage. And while that can be unsettling, it can also be deeply freeing, because a God who is bigger than our boxes is also bigger than our fears, bigger than our failures, and bigger than the places where our faith feels thin.